So you want to buy a toll road, a strip of asphalt that millions of people are forced to drive on, with a contract that lets you raise the price every single year for 75 years. It is a legal monopoly. And here is the strangest true thing about it. You can buy that monopoly, run it perfectly, never miss a single toll, and still end up in bankruptcy court 8 years later. That is not a horror story. That is the actual history of the Indiana toll road. In 2006, two of the smartest infrastructure companies on the planet paid Indiana $3.8 billion for the right to run 157 miles of highway for 75 years. Not per year. That is the upfront check. 8 years in, they filed for bankruptcy, carrying around $6.3 billion in obligations, because the traffic came in below the forecast that justified the price. The road never closed. It never stopped collecting. The asphalt was fine. The owner is the thing that died. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how that is possible. How a guaranteed money machine keeps killing the people who own it. So let us open the books together. What does a toll road actually sell when it is not really selling asphalt? Why does the biggest cost never show up in the brochure? And who is really getting rich here? Because it is almost never the first owner. We know money is not a problem for you. Grab the price ladder. Let us go shopping. Let us start cheap. Picture a side-by-side rate comparison, 5 rungs, from pocket change to an entire empire. Rung 1, a whole toll road at a fire sale. The Camino Colombia Road in Texas was built for $90 million, opened and then sold at a foreclosure auction for $12 million. That is about 13 cents on the dollar, after the truck traffic the owners predicted simply never showed up. Rung 2, around $600 million, buys you a single marquee concession. Macquarie paid $617.5 million for the Dulles Greenway in Virginia. The Pocahontas Parkway nearby sold for $600 million after the previous owner rode its stake all the way down to zero. Are you sensing a pattern yet? Rung 3, a marquee city road, the Chicago Skyway, 7.8 miles, went for a 99-year lease at $1.83 billion, then resold 11 years later for $2.8 billion. Rung 4, the big interstate, the Indiana toll road you already met, $3.8 billion in, resold out of bankruptcy for $5.7 billion. The ceiling of the American market was the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which drew a winning bid of $12.8 billion before the politicians killed the deal in the legislature. And Rung 5, the whole empire. France sold 3 motorway networks in one wave for 14.8 billion euros. Italy sold Autostrade, roughly 3,000 kilometers of it, for about 19 billion euros in enterprise value. And at the very top sits Transurban, 21 roads across Australia and North America, worth around 45 billion Australian dollars. Or, if you are feeling handy, build one yourself, about $2 to $3 million per lane mile out in the country, and $8 to $11 million per lane mile for an urban freeway. Though fair warning, the last big Texas build cost about $1.1 billion, and its operator went bankrupt too. Notice the pattern on this ladder. Almost every rung has a bankruptcy or a write-it-down staple to it. This is a $25 billion a year American industry. 6,208 toll miles across 33 states. Around 9.6 billion transactions a year. Enormous, essential, and absolutely littered with corpses. Now, let us open the operating books. Here is a cost stack bar chart of everything it takes to run the thing. And here is the good news for you as an owner. At the asset level, a toll road is one of the highest margin businesses on earth. Operating profit margins of 70% to 80% are normal. Transurban ran a 73% margin in a single year. So the running costs are only about 20% to 35% of revenue. But 2 lines inside that stack will surprise you. Surprise number 1, collecting the money. Everyone assumes the asphalt is the big cost. It is not. On the old cash systems, collecting a toll ate 20% to 30% of every dollar you collected. A single cash transaction cost around $1 to process. The electronic version, under 25 cents. Cash is roughly 15 times more expensive. Just to take the money. Switch everything to all electronic tolling and collection drops to about 5% of revenue. That is why the toll booth operator is going extinct. And here is a number that explains the whole industry's obsession with going electronic. A manual cash booth pushes about 240 vehicles per hour per lane. Open road electronic tolling pushes 1,800 to 2,200. That is a 5 to 6-fold jump in throughput from the same strip of pavement just by firing the booth. Next line, maintenance, routine upkeep runs about $14,500 to $18,700 per lane mile every year, though pricey states push past $65,000. Resurfacing costs around $204,000 per lane mile each cycle, and a full reconstruction can hit $3 million per lane mile. Then staffing, collectors, crews, and often a dedicated, around-the-clock state police force paid straight out of your tolls. The Pennsylvania Turnpike alone runs over 425 plow trucks with 450 operators across roughly 2,900 snow lane miles, just to fight the winter, or your monopoly turns into a parking lot. There is leakage, too. On electronic systems, you lose 6% to 7% of transactions, and if you bill people by their license plate, you can lose 40% of that revenue. Industry-wide, about $2.24 billion out of roughly $20 billion owed never gets collected. What about insurance? Smaller than you would think, and not even broken out separately in most road financials, so we will not pretend to quote you a figure. But none of those is what kills owners. For a concession, remember, the real cost line is that giant upfront lease payment itself, the $3.8 billion, the $1.83 billion. You do not pay it in cash, you borrow it. And that brings us to the surprise biggest line, the one that never shows up in the brochure. Here is a stat call out for it: debt service. When you borrow billions to buy the road, the interest on that loan is the real monster. Look at the Ohio Turnpike. In one recent year, it spent about $143 million on operations and about $135 million on debt service. The interest alone was nearly as big as running the entire road. The Pennsylvania Turnpike carries more than $14 billion in debt and pays roughly $836 million a year to service it. For a leveraged buyer, that interest can swallow the entire 70 to 80% profit surplus and then some. The road prints cash. The acquisition loan takes every dollar of it. That is the exact machine that put Indiana into bankruptcy court. So how does this thing actually make money? Let us run the money flow waterfall, and let us lead with the engine nobody talks about. It is not traffic growth, it is the contract. Your concession comes with an escalation clause, the right to raise tolls faster than inflation every year for the life of the lease. The standard language is the greater of a fixed percentage, or inflation, or the growth of the economy, whichever is highest. The Chicago Skyway was frozen at just $2 all the way back in 1993. Today it is around $8, $10 for a car, and it still has nearly 80 years left to run. It roughly quadrupled in 20 years, and you have barely started. And why does that pricing power hold? Because demand for your road is almost perfectly inelastic on a peak hour commute with no good free alternative. Drivers barely flinch when you raise the price. They value their time more than your toll. Engine 2, dynamic pricing on express lanes. You reprice the road every few minutes based on demand with no real cap. One Virginia express lane hit a record $44 for a single one-way trip. The 91 express lanes in California, just 10 miles of road, pulled in $48.9 million in tolls in a single year, and about $1 billion since 2003. Engine 3, and this one is nearly pure profit, violation and toll-by-plate fees. Miss a payment and the base toll picks up a $2.50 admin fee, then escalates to a $57.50 penalty backed by a hold on your car registration. Those same 91 express lanes collected roughly $860 million in fees and penalties, a number that dwarfs the actual tolls. Engine 4. The road is also a strip of real estate. You lease the right-of-way to fiber optic and telecom companies, which insiders call serious money, plus service plazas, fuel royalties, and advertising. And Engine 5, the safest of all, an availability payment. The government keeps the toll risk and simply pays you to keep the road open to standard. Florida's I-4 project works exactly that way. You get paid even if nobody drives. Now for the twist. Picture a margin donut of where all this money really goes, because the person driving is not the one getting rich, and neither, often, is the owner. The house always wins, and the house is the fund manager. Macquarie figured out that you do not treat a toll road as a road at all. You treat it as a fund packaged and sold to investors. And you skim a fee at every single layer, arranging, managing, advising. On one set of Sydney roads, Macquarie reportedly captured around a 30% internal rate of return just by flipping the portfolio. Meanwhile, who is the money actually coming from? A pension retiree. The people who bought the Chicago Skyway for $2.8 billion were 3 Canadian pension funds. Indiana's rescue buyer, IFM, is owned by Australian retirement funds. The retiree carries the traffic risk. The fund manager collects private equity-style fees, whether the road hits its forecast or not. Think about that. The most sophisticated infrastructure operators alive have gone bankrupt owning guaranteed monopolies, not because the monopoly failed, but because they paid too much for it and financed it with a mountain of someone else's retirement savings. And here is the closing irony, the one that flips the whole story. Did the public get robbed when they sold? Chicago probably did undersell. It took $1.83 billion, then watched the tolls climb almost 280% and the lease resell for $1 billion more. But Indiana got the better deal precisely because the buyer overpaid $3.8 billion and went broke. The state pocketed every dollar. The investors ate the loss. The public's best possible outcome was selling to a buyer dumb enough to overpay and die. So, worth it? Here is the honest answer, and here is a stat call-out to close on. The road itself is a dream, a guaranteed monopoly, margins of 70% to 80%, prices you get to raise forever. On customers who have no other way home, the asset almost never fails. But the owner does, and it comes down to 2 numbers you now understand. The traffic forecast, which is overstated by about 23% on average, and the pile of debt you use to buy the thing. Overpay at the auction. Overborrow, believe the rosy forecast, and your guaranteed monopoly hands you a guaranteed bankruptcy. The winning move is almost cheating. Let some other billionaire buy it first. Overpay and go broke. Then you buy the exact same road second out of bankruptcy for cents on the dollar, and you collect tolls happily for the next 60 years. The road was always a gusher. The trick was just not being the one who paid too much to hold the bucket. If you would open the books on something like this, drop a like and hit subscribe, and we will keep counting the money. See you at the next one.